Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's get out of that and go back to this screen. I wrote myself a note. I read your response to the HR interview, and I am so glad and thankful, and I need to make sure I started taking this, that you mentioned that your system doesn't have employee assistance. I'm glad that you know that a lot of folks haven't mentioned that. I guess they didn't know to ask. But Tiffany, she says her district has it, but that's one of the victims of the budget crisis in North Carolina, is that a lot of districts are doing away with the employee assistance programs, and that's making it really, really tough on. Hey, Leanna, how are you?
Good.
It's making it really tough on principals. You know, I had a teacher in Charlotte when I was a junior high principal that had a substance abuse problem, and without employee assistance, I don't know what I would have done. And you know, for drug testing, alcohol, mental health issues, and family and personal counseling, that saves you as the supervisor from having to do those things, and take some of the bad guy out of the principal role. And it's really, really tough when a district cuts that out of their HR department and it falls on the principal to have to do all of those things. Now, those things are still in law. And that was the point that I wanted to make. Hello, Elizabeth. Welcome. That was the point that I wanted to make today from that discussion board. Even if your district no longer has an employee assistance program, you're still responsible to provide that assistance. It falls on the principal to do those things, because there are Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. Everybody knows what that is. There are rules and regulations on how you deal with employees who have substance or alcohol abuse problems. There are laws on how you have to deal with mental health issues and personal counseling. And if your district let those people go and doesn't provide those services, they fall upon you as the principal to do that. And so if I were principal in a district that didn't have an employee assistance program in their HR division, human resources, then the first thing that I would do would be to find the manual and find out what I have to do as a principal to make sure that I meet those laws. I would have never known. Elizabeth, can you hear me?
I can.
Right,
welcome. How are you?
I'm great. I would have never known the links that you have to go to deal with an employee with a substance abuse issue. You can't fire them for abandoning their job. Normally, if an employee doesn't show up for 3 straight days, or in some districts it's 5 straight days, they can be relieved of their duties for non-compliance for not showing up. But if they have a substance abuse problem, you can't do that. In smaller rural districts or in districts that have decided to do away with that, you're not allowed to do away with employee assistance. They just don't have anybody in the HR department to assist you as the principal with that. And that's the point that I wanted to make tonight. And I am so glad that Kristen brought that up in her discussion board post, that her district, that was a victim of the budget cuts. But I wanted to assure you and make sure I made the point that on that does not alleviate the responsibility from the principal providing those services. Even though the district no longer does it, you still have to do it, because you still fall under all of the guidelines of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that sets the standards and protections for employees. It's difficult. I'm not going to lie to you. As I said, if I hadn't had employee assistance, I'm sure I'd have made multiple mistakes in dealing with the substance abuse issue problem that I had with the teacher that I had in Charlotte. And I got other assistants, but that was the one that I would have never figured that one out on my own, even if I'd have gotten the manual, I don't think. So You need to make sure that you know the difference in your district, wherever you get hired as principal. You need to make sure that you determine whether there is an employee assistance unit in your human resources department or not. And if not, then you need to get that employee assistance manual, and you'll make sure that you have to do those things. It's an added thing for you to have to do, and it's difficult, but you do not want to violate their rights. That's not the appropriate thing to do. So thank you, Kristen, for bringing that one up. Looking at other posts this week, talking about funding, we all know there's different pots of money. You know, your federal money generally pays for your CTE teachers, pays for your exceptional children's teachers, it pays for your Title I teachers. Local pays, capital. We've talked about in 1965, North Carolina got out of the school building business, got out of capital funding, and so your local money pays for your buildings and the upkeep of the buildings. At one time, local budgets would hire a good many additional teachers, but in the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, since 2008, when the budget crashed in North Carolina due to the economy, a lot of districts have gotten out of the business of hiring additional assistant principals and additional teachers with local funds. For example, in a 3-grade middle school, a lot of times districts, what they would do is the enrollment would only justify 2 state-paid assistant principals, and the local would hire a third. A lot of those days are gone now. Not so many local teachers being hired with local funds is what I'm saying. The state gives you a per pupil. We've talked about that. The modified accrual accounting system, we've talked about. They give you the money in 10 installments based on average daily membership. So the point that I wanted to make is that personnel is by far and away the biggest expense in school business. It's about 70% of the budget is for school personnel. It's a people business. It's driven by that. And you need to make sure that you understand how teachers are being paid and what funds they're being paid out of in terms of what duties you can assign to them and what you can expect. As I mentioned to you last week, I had an English teacher position that was teaching a CTE course all day. You can't do that. I inherited that one and had to change it immediately. You can't do that. It was a state-paid position teaching a federal curriculum. That won't work. And assigning duties, sometimes you can't assign duties, extra duties to federally funded teachers. You need to make sure that you find out and it's a lot of times it's by district. I can tell you what we did in Charlotte, but in Burke County and Rutherford, the counties that I worked in. But you need to find out in your county, are there additional restrictions based on categories because of the funding that comes along. I know that CTE teachers can't be assigned a lot of extra duties because they're federally paid teachers, and they have other responsibilities out in the community along with their teaching. A lot like marketing, DECA, agricultural teachers, they have to do some community things, and so you can't assign them extra duties. You need to make sure that you understand that the funding source has a lot to do with what you can do with a particular teacher or an employee. Locally paid people, you can do more with them if you have them, but as I said, there aren't as many of those circulating around as there used to be. That has kind of gone away. So the point of that discussion board was to get you to understand that different categories of personnel are created by different funding sources. And how you can work with those people or what you expect of them differs according to what their funding source is. I know that's confusing, but that's the way the business works. So sometimes people will say, well, you made so-and-so do this, or they did that, or you asked them to do this, that, or the other, but you didn't, why do they not have to do this if I do? Well, it's all about the funding source. That's exactly why. All right. So those were my notes from discussion boards this week. I continue to be impressed with the quality of your discussion boards. Everybody's turning work in. You're keeping me busy grading, and I like that. Very happy with all of those things. All right. Anybody have any questions on anything that we've covered? The night is halfway for us. This is 5 sessions. Any questions on anything that we've covered so far? All right. Tonight I want to talk to you about personnel from 2 aspects. First is from hiring them, and the second is from evaluating them once you have them. So my first, let's see if I can go to a new share. All right. This is hiring decisions. I'm not going to read all these slides to you. It's on our Zoom session 5. But a couple of things that I need for you to understand about the law about hiring. The school board hires, not the principal, not the superintendent. The school board hires. And they also have to be the people that sign off on any dismissals. So make sure that you understand that going in. You recommend to the superintendent recommends to the board. You can't tell somebody, I'm going to hire you, because you don't actually hire. And it may not go up the line. So make sure that you understand that the local Board of Education hires everybody in the district, including the principal, including the superintendent, and all teachers. That might sound like a minor point. It is not. It is a major point. So please understand that. It's a duty of the superintendent to recommend the board election of all principals, teachers, and others, and it's the principal's duty to recommend to the superintendent. That's the way the law works. That's not Dale's opinion, or that's not just consistent with what goes on in your district. That's the law. That's the way it has to happen. The reason I like this slide, it says be thorough. A sub is better than a bad hire. Now, I tell people all the time, the best way to get out of a swamp is don't get in it to start with. There is no good way to get out once you get in. Your job is to find good people who are willing, and then to make them able. And we do that by, working best practices, high yield strategies. We work on that, and we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But you got to find good people. Do your homework, check references. Now, there was one post that spoke to a lot of that was done through human resources. In the larger districts, for example, when I worked when I was principal in Burke County, it's still the same, like all small rural districts. You do it about, you sent in, you had to prove you had an opening, you sent it into HR and they advertised it for you, but you had to vet the candidates, do their references, and do all those kinds of things, and make the recommendation back to the superintendent. When I was principal in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we didn't do any of it. They had an applicant pool. They applied. They got their health certificate. They did all their drug testing, the background screening, all that stuff. The references were checked by people who were called HR, or human resource analysts, and they did all of that. And then when they would recommend candidates out to you, and they were available to be hired. There was nothing wrong with them. But that was one of the benefits of working in a large district that has a lot of resources. If you're working in a smaller district, you have to do all those things I just mentioned yourself. And so if you do, you need to make sure you do your homework. But again, a sub's better than a bad hire, because you can change subs. It's difficult to get rid of bad hires. I like this slide. Would you put your child in that teacher's class? That's always the question that you have to ask yourself. You don't want them to have to be working around a teacher all the time. So that's a good question to ask. Establish procedures and protocols and stick with them. These are generally for school districts where you have to do it all yourself. The reason I like this slide is a protocol means that you should have interview questions that have been vetted by your district, and you asked everybody the same ones. And I have a copy of those. Let me see. And go back to a new share. I want to try to integrate these in. Oh, I'm going to have to go back to my desktop, share screen. I'm going to have to go and close this one and go back here and go to interview questions. Here we go. Can everybody see that? It says school administrator interview questions. Very good. All right. These are the kinds of questions that you can ask as a principal. There's 154 of them, I believe. Obviously, you're not going to ask somebody 154 questions, but these are the kinds of questions that have been vetted and that you can ask. And you can download this. But you need to go through and pick maybe 10 questions, and every one of the candidates you ask them the same question so you can have a comparative basis. But this is when the school administrator does interviews. This is when you're down with that person. Now, there are also other other interviews that are done. A lot of districts that run this through the interview process through the district and create an applicant pool. This is for districts that are more high wealth and do a lot of the work themselves. What they will do is they will do an activity, or what we call scenario interviews, where they're given scenarios. This one is an email scenario, and it shows, do you know the law? Do you know policy? Do you understand what's important and what's not? And you work on this. They give you a scenario rather than just a question to answer. They give you scenarios. For example, I like number 2 here. All right, we're gonna have a pop quiz here on number 2. Dr. Brown, the newspaper would like to do a feature on you as a new principal, and I need to set up a time for interviewing you and some of your teachers and students. Please respond as soon as you receive this email and let me know a good time to come out. Thank you. Tom Roberts, State Educational News. All right. Is this important? Is it urgent? How would you respond to this one? Elizabeth, your microphone's on. You can be the guinea pig tonight. How would you respond to that? And what would you respond? How would you respond? What would you do with this one?
Well, I think I was actually talking to my principal today about, I interviewed him today because I've been out of town this week training teachers in Johnson County, and he was talking about he really needed to advertise our school more and get our school out, let people know more about our school. So I feel like it is a priority for the newspaper to learn more about your school. So I would respond. I definitely would get parent permission for the newspaper to interview the students, as well as I would ask the teachers first and get their permission as well too. Sometimes the paper can reword things and change things, so I think it's good that they would want to put a feature of a school in there. So it's not as urgent as some things, but if the time allows for it, I think that it would be a great opportunity to broadcast your school.
Yeah.
So it is on the spot with, like a feature on myself, but I would really like the opportunity to feature some of the teachers and students, because a lot of times they don't feel like, in this day and time that they're appreciated, and I feel like it would really boost the morale of the school.
Sure. So it is important, and it is fairly urgent. But here's the trick. There's always a trick to all the questions that I ask. You would not contact this person at all. Why not?
Would my county media person, is he the one?
There you go. Okay. All media requests have to go through Public Information Office. All.
Now, as a teacher, like being in Title I and doing parent involvement events, and like when we wrote a grant this year, you probably saw it in the Shelby Star, but I was the one that reached out to the Shelby Star. Is that appropriate from a teacher perspective?
No, generally the policy is that all media requests and all media contact needs to be approved through your public information office. Probably it was okay for you to contact them about doing a PR piece, but if you get a media request of any kind, now your public information office may say, fine, that's good, contact them and go on. But as a represent, the teacher is not representing the district. As an administrator, you are representing the district.
Right.
You're like an official spokesperson.
Okay.
And you can be quoted, and sometimes it does get twisted. Exactly. And so this is one of those trick questions. This is a policy question. Yes, it's urgent. Yes, it's important. But no, you would not contact this person. Okay. You would contact any media request you have, TV, radio, newspaper. You have to contact your public information office. Okay. And they would handle it from there. They would tell you, yeah, go ahead and set it up, or no, we will negotiate it for you. Okay. One way or the other, you make sure you do that. Perfect. So these are scenario interviews, and that would be something that would be important. If they gave you these scenarios, you would say, first thing I would do is contact public information, and if they gave me the go-ahead, I would do X, Y, and Z. But this is important, and it is urgent. All right. So they give you, normally there's about 20, I think there's 21 on this one. And they ask you also, there's always a trick. There's a few trick questions like that one is do you know the policy? Do you know law? But they'll give you something like this where you're supposed to file each one of these 21 in one of these 4 quadrants. Urgent and important, not urgent but important, urgent but not important, and not urgent and not important. Now, which one of these, if you put any of these 21 questions in, which one of these quadrants, if you put them in, would they know that you're not the right person for the job? Look at those 4 quadrants again. Urgent, important, not urgent, but important, urgent but not important, and not urgent, not important. Which of those would you never have? Would you never have a case to file them in that box? I'll go ahead. Kristen, you got it?
The urgent, not important?
There you go. How could it be urgent but not important? That's to see how well you think rationally. So if you put any of the 21 questions in that box, that would pretty much automatically disqualify you because you're not a rational thinker. But yes, Kristen, gets the prize. Her and Elizabeth both did a good job today. So this is the kind of thing that they will give you as a applicant pool type question, scenarios. We do this now with a lot of teachers. We even do this for assistant principals now. This is actually an assistant principal activity. So this is the second type of interviews that might happen. Principal-led interviews for teachers, your district may do, before you get them, may do a scenario interview with them. And then a lot of times, one of the things that Elizabeth mentioned, a lot of times when you're interviewing, you do groups. You have a group of people, like a parent on the committee, a teacher or two in the same grade level or the same subject. And those are called group-led interviews, and those are a little bit different. They kind of round robin and fire a question at you. I also have a copy of what those look like. Group-led interview questions. They're a little more open-ended to get you to talk. They're not so much right answer type of questions. Describe what you perceive as your leadership style. And then I've got what you should be looking for when you do the interviews. This is a really good one. Obviously, child-centered is one of the things you should be looking for with a teacher. So this is when, as a principal, your district, so some districts do all 3. Some of them have an applicant pool where they do the scenarios, and the people that make it through those, they come to the school and they do a group-led interview. They invite, 3 or 4 or 5 applicants, and then the final 2 go to the principal for the principal interview. Some combination of those In Charlotte-Mecklenburg, they do all three. And actually, in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, they do a fourth one for administrative candidates that comes before all the others, and it's called a perceiver. And you'll be introduced to that in Mels 605. You'll see that information. The book is Strength Finder. But for teachers, you can have as many as 3 different types of interviews. Again, a scenario interview that's kind of to get you into the applicant pool as a teacher. And then once you get referred out to a school, you can have a group interview with a group of people. And then once you get through that, you get to the principal. So I have all 3 of those on our board today. The whole idea here, though, I'm belaboring the point, I get it. The whole idea, though, is to find the right person. And we try all the methodology that we can. You can't try too much stuff, but the idea of doing all these things is to find the right person. All right, so now, go back to that hiring decision and look at that again. There's some really good slides in that one again. Look at the different interview questions, principal, the group led, the in-basket activity. All of those are good. And then I've got a good PowerPoint on human resources. Let's look at it quickly. And the reason why I wanted to look, you can look at all of it, but the one that I want to focus on for the next few minutes is what's called merit pay. But it's not really merit pay. It's more pay per performance. North Carolina is trying to move to a pay per performance. The product that we're using, it's actually from a private firm in the Research Triangle, is EVOS. I know you've all heard of EVOS, value added. We try to determine how much value an individual teacher adds to a child so that we can do differentiated pay or pay per performance. And that's why a lot of folks in educators involved, included, and a lot of people that are not educators are calling for merit pay or pay per performance to try to differentiate pay between teachers so that everybody just doesn't get paid the same whether you're effective or whether you're not. Now, so I have on our board today EVOS Standard 6. We haven't fully implemented EVOS. The idea is that eventually in North Carolina, what we would like to see is half of a teacher's evaluation be from the standard evaluation system, where you do walkthroughs and you do formal observations. Now, I have that manual on today's Zoom week 5, and you've seen that manual. You've all been teachers. I won't belabor that one with you. So that would be half of your evaluation. And then eventually what North Carolina wants to do with Standard 6 is have the other half of your evaluation be based on whether or not 85% of your students made a year's growth. Now, we all know that the growth model is the fairest. I don't like that word fair. That's a place you go in the fall of the year to eat a corn dog and ride the Ferris wheel. But it's the most equitable system of measuring or of accountability. Comparative accountability, there are certain populations around the state where you're never going to win because they're so low when they come in. But the growth model is about taking a student and growing them a year's growth. That's the most equitable way. And so eventually what we'd like to do to differentiate pay in North Carolina is to be able to take, half of, are you using high yield strategies? Everybody understands that our evaluation system in North Carolina is based on McCrell. We can change the name, but it's still the same stuff. Everybody knows that Robert Marzano is McCrell. He runs the Midwest Consortium, which that's McCrell is an acronym for. It goes back to his 9 high yield strategies. You used all of those in 601 when you did your app sale. You understood, and you've used them again probably in the app tell in 602, the 9 high yield strategies of Robert Marzano. But that is the basis of our teacher evaluation system in North Carolina. So half of your evaluation of as an administrator of a teacher would be based on that. The other half would be, does a teacher meet the 85% standard, which we consider to be mastery in North Carolina? Do 85% of her students make growth? So that's where we're headed in North Carolina. I think right now some districts are doing 10 or 15%. Don't quote me on this one because the count may have gone up. But the last time that I did a little research, 37 states out of 50 in the United States of America are moving toward a paper performance plan based on value added. 37 out of 50. I've heard rumor that it's closer to 40 now, but my research the last time I looked, and it's been a couple of years, it was 37. So that's the wave of the future, is evaluating teachers on whether their kids grow or not, and that way they're not punished by where the kid started at. I mean, if you get a kid that's 2 years behind grade level and you move him, a year and a half, he's still a half year behind. You've done a yeoman's. You've been a miracle worker, but you're punished because the kid you got was that far behind. So that's what EVOS is. It's a value added model that seeks to determine how much value you add as a teacher. So to that end, I'm going to explain the EVOS model to you today. So let's move to that. Okay. I may have to move some of these things out so that I can get to that. Have I got that one? Yes, I do. Let me close a couple things here and see if I can. There we go. All right. So here we go. I specifically designed this one for my 602 class, but it's relevant to what we're doing here. It's actually probably more relevant for us folks. I just did it at the 602 to show the statistical component of it. But this is in teacher evaluation. This is the wave of the future. You need to learn this. Teachers will be partially evaluated up to 50% of their evaluation score on whether or not 85% of their students make a year of growth. Schools then in turn will be evaluated on whether 85% of their teachers made their growth or not. So that's the way that's going to work. Now, analysis of variance has been performed on standardized test scores collected over the last 20 years. So what happened? They took 20 years of test score data, and they had the score. That's the independent variable. And they had all of the dependent variables that about that particular child, his race, income, mother's education, all of those things. I'm going to go over that in just a minute. They dumped all that into a large mainframe computer, and it herded out what percent of variance that each of those dependent variables, like age or race, had on the independent variable, which is his test score. So that's how this, so they didn't go eeny, meeny, mo and assign these percentages randomly. Now remember, EVOS is done by a private firm, SAS in Raleigh. Their formula is proprietary. This is my best guess because I'm in this business of what they've done. So I do know how an analysis of variance works. Now, what you do is you take those percentages and you do a regression equation with them. And that way you can come up with a score, a raw score, that would represent a year's growth for that student. Okay, that formula looks like this: x1 plus x2. That makes no sense to you, but let's move on. So here are the 10 dependent variables that I believe factor into the prediction of what a year's growth score would be. And the percentages are based on what test scores look like in North Carolina. Now, race, 30%. We know that there is a gap in every school in North Carolina, public school, is required to have a closing the gap program between the different races of students. That's what your app cell was, whether you knew it or not. Basically what you did in the app cell is what's required. Every school is required to do is look at subgroups, look at their score data, find and do some research and put a program in place to address the score gap. So race counts for 30%, mother's education 15%. Why? Because she's the one that does lap time with small children. We know that lap time is important, sitting in your mother's lap and having her read to you. Father's income, father makes enough money, mother can stay at home and work with you. The teacher, Only 10% of the variance in a kid's test score. A great teacher only counts for 10%. But that's important. I mean, that's fourth on the list. The school district, whether it's high wealth or low wealth, the school itself, the grade that the kid is in terms of is he age appropriate for his grade, his age, his gender, and previous test scores. Those are the 10 variables that I believe, dependent variables that contribute in those percentages to a child's independent variable, his test score. So now, only 2 of those things can be affected by the school. So there's 2 lessons to be learned here. First is you can determine, you have control over age versus grade. If you retain kids, we know that they do worse when they're not age appropriate for their grade. So that's why everybody in the state is required now to use response to intervention. That's to try to catch kids up, and we know that summer school is not really that valuable. Try to catch kids up and not let them be behind. So we do our remediation as we go because we don't want kids to be age inappropriate for the grade they're in. We can't have an affect on that. We can't change his race or his father's income or his mother's education. We do have some control over whether or not he's age appropriate for his grade. And the other is the teacher. So again, don't get bogged down into what to teach, like Common Core, and get into that argument. Your job as principal is going to be instructional delivery, how to teach. That's what you've got to work on with your teachers. So you can affect that, the teacher quality and making sure that you don't retain kids. That's the 2 things in this equation that you have the most impact over. School leaders must recognize that quality teachers contribute 10% of the variance in test scores. You got to continually provide staff development in Marzano's high yield strategies and all delivery methods, which is whole group, PLC, one-on-one. Again, how to teach, not what to teach. And so you got to go back to that model that you had in your APTEL. I call it MTSS for teachers, the multi-tier system, support system. I think you have to do that. I think you have a legal and moral obligation to do something like this in order to try to improve instruction in your school. So starting during the teacher work days, you need to do one of those work days, you need to do whole group, all your faculty on Marzano's 9. This is the coin of the realm. Now, how long that session lasts is dependent upon your data from the year before and your hiring practices from the summer. What I mean is, if you had a lot of teachers the year before that weren't using high yield strategies, then you need maybe to do an all-day staff development whole group. Or if you hired a bunch of new teachers just out of college over the summer that don't know what high yield strategies are, then you better spend all day. Conversely, if you've got a group of veteran teachers that were all doing high yield strategies and you didn't hire a bunch of kids over the summer, then you might not do but 30 minutes at that first work day. But you need to make sure every beginning work day, at the beginning of every year, that you remind everybody that high yield strategies is the coin of the realm in North Carolina. That's how we get good test scores, and that's how we're going to evaluate you. On your half of your evaluation or more, it's more right now, is always going to be based on how well you do those high yield strategies. Eventually, half is going to be based on outcomes, how well your kids did in terms of growth. The first semester in your PLC work, you're going to choose the lowest of those 9 high yield strategies that aren't being utilized very much in your building, and you're going to have teachers work on those during their PLC meetings. How often they work on them, again, is if they're not using non-linguistic representation, which is usually the least used of the 9 strategies, if they're not using it all, you might want to make them work on it every week in PLC. If they're using it about 50% of the time, you might not make them do it but once a month. But you need to make sure that they work on that. When I say work on that, they need to bring lesson plans and evidence to the PLC. This is how I'm going to integrate this high yield strategy into my teaching routine. Not just sit and talk about it. This is what I am going to do. Going back to Marzano, this is what I am going to do. And then during that first 9 weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we take our best teachers that are the best practitioners of Marzano's high yield strategies, and we're going to have them mentor one-on-one peer coach our beginning teachers. Now, this speaks to the OMA that you're doing this summer in scheduling. There's a hierarchy in the scheduling. Federal law comes first, state law, local board policy, best practices, teacher input. This is number 4, best practices. Best practices for scheduling is make sure that your mentor and mentee do not have common planning time. Why not? Well, you want them to be able to observe one another while they're teaching. If they have common planning time, they're both on planning at the same time. That means when the mentor is on planning, the mentee is not teaching at that time and vice versa. So you have to make that a priority. That's a best practice. Mentors and mentees should not have common planning time so that they can get into one another's room and watch the other one teaching. And you would do that during the first 9 weeks. Now, if you'll remember from the APTEL, Robert Marzano does high yield strategies. Todd Whitaker speaks to empowerment as a school-wide leader. Marzano speaks to being empowered as a classroom leader. That means being an effective practitioner of those 9 high yield strategies. That's empowerment as a classroom leader. Whitaker speaks to empowerment as a school leader. And the first of those 5 levels of empowerment is teaching other teachers. So this would give your best teachers the opportunity to teach others and get them on that hierarchy of becoming a school-wide leader, not outside of their classroom. The first level is teach other teachers. The second level, of course, is being involved in the school improvement plan. The third level of school-wide empowerment for a teacher is to be involved in curriculum. The fourth level is to be involved in resources. And the fifth level, and the holy grail of being an empowered school-wide teacher leader, is being involved in personnel decisions. So this gets you started. You need to have a system where you can get teachers started on that hierarchy to where you can build them into school-wide leaders. We know that empowerment works on efficacy and makes them more effective and happier too. So this is the first semester. Now, the second half of the first semester, we're going to add our low-performing teachers to the peer coaching model. We're going to start now peer coaching these folks for 9 weeks to see if we can improve their behaviors in their classroom. This is teachers. We were already working on the beginners, but now we're going to add the low-performings on or about October 25th. We're going to add them to the model. We're going to give them 9 weeks of one-on-one help without any value, any judgment, without any penalty. We're going to give them 9 weeks of help. All right. Second semester, we're going to continue with our whole group again on or about January 25th. That work day that we generally have right before second semester starts. We need to do a follow-up with the whole faculty. It may not be more than 5 minutes, but we need to do a follow-up. Remember, this is how you're being evaluated. This is what will get our best test scores. We'll continue with PLC work. We'll move to the second lowest of our 9, usually cooperative learning or similarities or differences or questioning and cluing. We're going to move to that one in PLC. We should have beat the first one to death by now. And so now we're going to move to the second of those strategies. We're going to continue to work with our beginning teachers. And we are going to continue to work with our low performers. Now, at this point, halfway through the year, for both the low performers and the beginners that aren't catching on, we're going to move them to an action plan and continue the one-on-one peer coaching. So in the end, they will have had, the low performers would have had 18 weeks of peer coaching, and the beginners 27 weeks of peer coaching before a reemployment decision is made on April 1st. And at April 1st, we make that decision. They get their notice of non-renewal or renewal on April 1st. And we're going to continue that peer coaching on the rest of the way through. But this, I believe, principals have the legal obligation is only 9 weeks. This way, they get 18 weeks of one-on-one, and 9 weeks of that is without an action plan, and 9 weeks is. The 9 weeks with the action plan and the help is required. The additional 9 weeks prior to that without the action plan is as a moral, legal, ethical thing. that you need to do. Because again, you can't dismiss a teacher. The superintendent can't. The board has to. And when you go to the board and say, I want to non-renew this teacher, whether they're a beginner and even especially if they're a career status or a continuing teacher, you better have some good data, because you, just like you don't make the hiring decision, you don't make the firing decision either. That's why I started with that today. That's important to understand the law. The board does the hiring and firing, and you better have very strong data when you want to go before the board, especially in small districts where everybody is related. You better have strong data. And this is above and beyond. If you work this model, it's the moral, ethical thing to do. Also, it'll help you out legally. There shouldn't be any kick or any feedback, any kickback on you non-renewing somebody if you have followed this legal, moral process here, where you work with these people for this additional time. So this is the model that I believe that you should adopt. You don't have to do mine, but you need one like this. So that speaks to the half of the evaluation. Now it's about 85% that's based on McCreel or Marzano. Now back to EBOS. How is that raw score determined? Well, I told you. You look at the dependent variables, and they contribute to the independent. So let's do a sample here for you. All right. Third grade math EOG, here's an example. Third grade math EOG has 180 questions. So the total raw score that a kid could make, if he got them all right, he'd make 180. That would be his raw score. The question is, what score out of 180 would represent a year's growth? It's not a standardized score. Every kid has his own score in the growth model. You know, mine might be 15. Elizabeth's probably be 175. But it's based on the individual. You're not comparing him to anybody but himself or herself. And that's why the growth model is the most equitable. So here's how it would go. Jamar is a third grade student in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. His dependent variables are: he's black, so he gets 20 out of 30 points. We know that that's the ratio from black to white in North Carolina. That's what we call the score gap. That's not being racist. That's just what the data tells us. All right? His mother has less than a high school diploma. That's 5 out of 15 points. Beyond a 4-year degree would be 15. No father in the home, so he gets 0 out of 15 points. Father's income was being in excess of $150,000, it would be 15 points for him. Teacher, we always assume the teacher's going to be great, so that would be 10 points. Charlotte Mecklenburg is a high wealth district, so that would be 5 points. A low wealth district would be 2 points. Billingsville, a particular school, was a takeover school. A high growth school would be 5 points. Grade, he's in the proper grade. He's not a repeater. So that's 5 points. However, he only gets 3 points on his year because he's 9 years old. He was developmentally delayed. He started school at 6, and so he's not age appropriate for his grade level. His gender, he gets 5 points because he's a male. Males do better in math. If he were female, would get 4, but it would be reversed if it were the reading EOG. The female would get 5 and he would get 4 because females do better on the reading test, males do better on the math test. Previous scores, too, is not on grade level according to M-class or double data coming out of second grade. So Jamar's equation looks like this: 25, 0, 10, 5, 0, 5, 3, 5, 2, 55%. So we would expect him to score 55% of a perfect score to show a year's growth. And so we multiply 55 by 180. Or 0.55, 55%, 99. So Jamar has to achieve 99, a raw score of 99 on the third grade math EOG. He has to get 99 questions out of 180 to make a year's growth. But every kid is individual. Every kid has their own score. Now, for you as a teacher to meet your objective, 85% of your kids have to make their growth. But there is not, again, a standardized score that they have to make. Every kid's score is his own score. And so you can see how it's calculated. Now, again, this is my best guess, but obviously this is fairly close to what actually SAS is doing, because these are the factors that matter. But going back to the original, the only two things that we can control as principals is the quality of that teacher and make sure that we're doing RTI so that we're not having kids who are being retained. So this is the evaluation system. I'd like for you to make sure that you go back and review the North Carolina Teacher Evaluation Manual. Look over this document. I have added it today to our list of this is how EVOS works. Again, teachers are evaluated on whether 85% of their students make growth. Schools will be evaluated on whether 85% of their teachers made their growth. And that's the way EVOS works. So these are the things that I wanted to cover with you today in terms of hiring and evaluation, in addition to the materials that you covered this week on our discussion board and also on the weekly turn-ins. So let's go back to the desktop. Let me close those. Okay. Okay. Staff selection, contracts, evaluation, and law. Review human resources website. That helps you with your discussion board, your interviews. We had some good interviews, and so these things go along. This one, teachers' rights, Principal's Guide, Chapter 4. Make sure you cover that one again. Again, it's not just a legal; it's a moral obligation. And that's why I was talking about earlier, even if your district does not have an employee assistant, it's your moral obligation. Not only is it legal, it's your moral obligation to follow through and make sure teachers' rights are upheld. We don't want to violate anybody's rights. On the other hand, we want to make sure that we don't keep ineffective teachers. There is no easy way to let people go. I've had to do it. There is no easy way to do it. But if you follow that MTSS model that I just showed you, again, I know that's for students, but it's also for teachers. You need to have a model, something like that. And you can sleep at night because you knew you did all that you could do. And this just wasn't the right business or profession for that person. You gave them every opportunity. You had somebody working with them every day. You were doing it, and it wasn't hypothetical. I mean, they were giving them real life examples and taking them to their room and showing them how to teach. You were doing what you needed to do. If you do that and you know that you're upholding teachers' rights, you'll be respected throughout your building. There's one of the things that I found out a long time ago. You can have the worst teacher in the building that's just everybody hates and is an awful person. But if you railroad them out of your building, teachers will be afraid of you and will not accept that, because what if you come after them? So you've got to, even though everybody might disrespect or not respect that person and know that they're a terrible teacher, you still got to do the moral, ethical, legal thing with them and make sure you do the right thing. You don't want to get the reputation as being anti-teacher. That would not be good. That won't work out for you. That will follow you throughout your career. You need to be seen as somebody who is a participatory leader that's transformational and inspires people, but holds people accountable for outcomes and what they do. And teachers will respect you if you get rid of the bad teachers but do it the right way. They won't respect you if you get rid of the bad teachers but don't do it the right way. So you need to come up with a model that's a continuous improvement loop that you use all the time to induct your beginning teachers and get them doing well. Take people. Your job was to find people who were willing, to begin with, and then you got to make them able. It's more difficult than you think now with all the lateral entry people that are coming into the business to find people who are very able. What you're mostly trying to find now is people who are willing, that want to do this, that are not just doing this until they, can get a union job back up north, or till they can get a job back in their hometown, or until, daddy decides to pay for them to go to graduate school or something. You're looking for people who really, truly want to be in this profession. And that's difficult. And once you get them in, it's then your job to make them able. And if you use that MTS, something like that MTSS model, it's a moral, legal, ethical thing. You'll create good teachers, or you'll build good teachers out of that, and you'll build a good reputation as a fair and equitable administrator that people will want to work for. I hope that the EVOS model is better explained to you now. Again, don't take this as the Bible. This is about my best guesstimate, but I'm in the business, so I believe that that's what they're doing. Those numbers come from the data that is accessible on the State Department's website. In terms of, you can look to see in North Carolina the differential between black students, white students, and Hispanic students. That's not, again, and you can look at all those different subgroups. We know what economically disadvantaged kids do. We know we have all that data, and they're using that data. So this notion that they're just using previous test scores, that's not true. They are using all these dependent variables that give a good prediction. And because a teacher is 10 percentage points, that's, the fourth highest of the things that matter. That's the difference a lot of times in kid making it or not. A bad teacher, 1 or 0 points, that's the difference in making it and not making it. So hopefully that's explained. So again, this week, selecting staff, the interview process. Does your district, do a lot of it for you, or do you have to do it yourself? You were supposed to find that out. That was by your discussion boards. What role do you have to play as a principal in your district in the hiring process? Is it all done for you like in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, or do you have to vet and check references? You need to know that. And then once you get them, you need a system of how you improve them, make them able, and get rid of the ones that don't conform. And then what the growth model is and how that works. So hopefully I've explained it somewhat cogently today. You can go back and review these documents later on. Does anybody have any questions on what I've covered today? Did it make any sense to you at all? Could you explain EVOS to somebody now? Not yet, but you will be able to. You're going to have to when you become an administrator. That's the first thing teachers are going to ask you about is how they come up with that score for a year's grade. You should be able to explain that to them. Okay? Anything for the good of the group before I sign off?
I don't think so.
All right. I think we'll probably return back to 7 o'clock next week. I know that's a more convenient time for everybody. I hope everybody's enjoying. I know everybody's out of school, and I hope everybody's enjoying themselves. So I will sign off now. This is, again, Dale Lamb, Gardner Webb, Mels 603. I will see you next Thursday at 7 p.m. Y'all have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.